Alright guys, welcome back to Underground Science, and in this video we'll be looking at the difference in white matter and gray matter in the central nervous system. Alright, so let's go and get started. So let's go ahead and start with the gray matter first. Alright, so the gray matter is going to be, if we look at the brain, right, so this is just it's not a 3D view of the brain, but if we look at the brain here, try to draw the cerebral cortex on the outside because that's where the cerebral cortex is, and it's actually classified as gray matter. Alright, so let's go ahead and label this as a cerebral cortex. So the cerebral cortex, and it's classified as being gray matter. Alright. Now, what gray matter means is that it's just a bunch of cell bodies. Alright, if we're talking about the central nervous system, right? So the gray matter is pretty much a bunch of cell bodies. Alright, so let me go ahead and write this better. So it's actually a few things. So the gray matter is made up of many cell bodies. So the gray matter is made up of, so one, it's made up of many cell bodies. Alright, so cell bodies, and then the other thing is that the gray matter is also known to be the one with the dendrites. Alright, so there's cell bodies with dendrites, right? And also, in addition to the fact that gray matter is made up of many cell bodies, dendrites, right? So many cell bodies, dendrites, they also are known to mostly have unmyelinated, hopefully I spelled that right, axons. Okay, so remember in the central nervous system, from our glial cell videos, we know that the oligodendrocytes are the one that are responsible for producing that myelin for the neurons in the central nervous system. And so, however, in gray matter, it's mostly unmyelinated axons. Alright, and it's mostly made up of cell bodies, many cell bodies, and dendrites. So if we go up here and look at the cerebral cortex, we'll actually see that we see a bunch of cell bodies here, right? So just a bunch of cell bodies, so with the nucleus and everything, right? So a bunch of cell bodies. So let me just go and draw a couple more, or not a couple more, but a few more, right? And then we'll see how the white matter plays a role also once we draw these cell bodies. Alright, so you can see it's packed with cell bodies, alright, neuronal cell bodies. And remember, cell body is the same thing as a soma, right? So these are the many cell bodies of the gray matter, alright? So these are many of the cell bodies of the gray matter. And so now let's go ahead and see what white matter is, or let's classify first what exactly white matter is. Alright, so white matter, white matter in the central nervous system is pretty much going to be the long myelinated axons. Alright, so long myelinated, so it's going to be full of myelin, long myelinated axons. Alright, so for example, some examples of these, right, of white matter in the brain, we can even list it out, is going to be our corticospinal tract, right, that we discussed in the, I believe if it was the upper motor neuron videos. And then so it's the corticospinal tract. We have our internal capsule, right, which are just projection fibers, right, that help project information to the cerebral cortex. Internal capsule. And then we have our association fibers, right, association fibers, right. There's many examples of these. And any tract, right, any tract that are just long myelinated axons, and we already said one example, like the corticospinal tract. And we also have, make sure you go and check out that video on the cortical bulbar tract, all right. And so we have association fibers, internal capsule, our corticospinal tract. We also have our corpus callosum, right, our corpus callosum. And the main white matter tissue that's responsible for the transmission of signals from the left side of our brain to the right side of the brain, present in the, oh, and vice versa, right? Present in the corpus callosum is our commissural fibers. So it's our commissural fibers. All right, so these are just a few examples of white matter tissue in our central nervous system. All right, and since we mentioned corticospinal tract, remember, let's just go ahead and add in our cortical bulbar tract as well. I can't say that word for some reason today. Cortico bulbar, all right, cortical bulbar tract. Remember, our cortical bulbar tract was pretty much the tract of upper motor neurons that we saw. So the cell bodies that started in our motor cortex, and then it extended down as a tract, right, bunch of axons to different areas of our brainstem, where it then synapsed on a lower motor neuron to go and innervate skeletal muscles of the head, face, and neck region. Okay, so that's that. So pretty much white matter, guys. Just remember that it's classified as long myelinated axons. So let's go and see the brain to see how this or where this is. So these are our cell bodies of our gray matter, and what we see is that deep inside the cerebrum is that we have a bunch of axons leading out. All right, we have a bunch of axons projecting out, and these are all long myelinated axons, right? And they all are part of the white matter tissue of the brain. So we can draw all of these axons coming out of these many cell bodies, all right? And you can see that these axons they can come here, right? They can come here and communicate with different parts of the cerebrum, right? They can even come here and communicate with the cerebellum, all right? So there can be tracks going down to the cerebellum. And then we know that we have our corticospinal tract where it comes down here, decussates, right? Where it comes down here, decussates, bunch of axons projecting down all the way here. Then we have our corticobulbar tract, right? So let me go draw this in brown so we can see it. Remember, we said in our upper motor neuron videos where it can come over here, but it's different for the facial muscles because it doesn't have to be opposite control. All right, so it doesn't have to be contralateral control is another word for it. All right, so pretty much if we're saying contralateral, meaning that for our cortical bulbar tracts, that axons that project down to innervate our lower motor neurons, right? It doesn't have to be the right side of the brain controlling the left side of the facial muscles, right? Or the head, face, or neck muscles, and the vice versa. It doesn't have to be contralateral. It can be the same side too sometimes for our cortical bulbar tract. So it can be one white matter axon projecting down here, so this in this way we would see our right side of the brain controlling facial muscles on the left side of the body, right? Or we could even just as well see another axon, white matter axon, or just white matter in general, projecting down its axon to a facial muscle on the right side, right? So it'll innervate a lower motor neuron on the right side of the brainstem. So in this case, we'll see the right side of the brain controlling facial muscle on the right side of the body. So we see some crossing over in our cortical bulbar tracts and some not crossing over. But for our corticospinal tracts, it's mainly crossing over. All right, so again, so this also represents the white matter too, because it's part of the cortical bulbar tract. So this also represents white matter, all right, that we just drew for the cortical bulbar tract. So that's pretty much it. That's the difference between white matter and gray matter, is that white matter is just a bunch of long myelinated axons if we look at the brain. Now, just know that if we drew it as there's only gray matter here and then white matter everywhere else. But we know that we have some subcortical structures in the brain, right? Like the hypothalamus and thalamus and basal ganglia, or basal nuclei is a more accurate word to say, because remember, nuclei, a group of nuclei. So let me go and write this down. A group of, or let's just say cell bodies, right? So group of cell bodies in the central nervous system is known as our nuclei, all right? But if we say a group of cell bodies or a bunch of cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system. But so this is different if we look at a group of cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system, because then that would be called a ganglia. All right, like we'll see in the future when we talk about parasympathetic and sympathetic neurons. So we see like a preganglionic neuron and postganglionic neuron. So they always innervate, or most of the time, on a ganglia, right? So we'll see that later though. But I just want to get those definitions out of the way. But anyway, we have some subcortical structures like the thalamus and the hypothalamus, and those are, and also the basal nuclei in our brain that are made up of gray matter tissue. So it's not just gray matter in the cerebral cortex and the white matter everywhere else. We have some subcortical structures inside, like the thalamus here. Then we're probably going to have the hypothalamus, right? Which I didn't show in this picture, but it's going to be right here about. And then we'll have basal nuclei, right? So let me write that down. So there's some subcortical structures that are gray matter, like the hypothalamus, the thalamus, and basal nuclei. All right, so those are some of the few subcortical structures that are also gray matter. All right. Okay, so the hypothalamus, thalamus, and basal nuclei are some subcortical structures that are made up of gray matter. All right, so if we go back up here, before we forget, remember that any group or even cluster, you can say, right? So any group or cluster of cell bodies in the central nervous system is going to be called a nuclei, while a group or cluster of cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system is going to be called a ganglia. All right, but sometimes you actually might hear basal ganglia being referred to a group of cell bodies or a cluster of cell bodies in the central nervous system. All right, so sometimes you hear basal nuclei or basal ganglia, but they both refer to the central nervous system. But just know that it should be called nuclei instead. All right. So, and also we should know that a nuclei, so the cluster or the group of cell bodies in the central nervous system that's called a nuclei, is gray matter. All right, with white matter surrounding it. And then we just have our group of cell bodies or cluster of cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system called ganglia. All right. And you know how we talked about white matter here, right? Projecting down from our cell bodies, a group of cell bodies, bunch of cell bodies in our cerebral cortex made up of gray matter. We also talked about some subcortical structures like our thalamus, our hypothalamus, our basal nuclei, right? That are also gray matter. And in the spinal cord, just to mention here, right? So let me go and draw the central canal here. And so in the spinal cord, zoom in here, it's actually the opposite. In the brain, we see the gray matter on the outside as the cortex and white matter on the inside, other than the subcortical structures like the hypothalamus, thalamus, basal nuclei, right? Those are some of the subcortical structures that are gray matter. But in this spinal cord, we see the opposite. We see gray matter on the inside and white matter on the outside. All right, so that's just a cool thing to know, I guess. All right, and that's pretty much it, guys. That's all I wanted to get through in this video. So I hope this video made sense to you guys. I hope to see you guys in my future videos where I'll talk about more cool topics about biochem, physics, and chem. Don't forget to hit that notification bell, like, and subscribe. See you guys later, and stay safe.